exploring the natural world one podcast episode at a time. This is For What It's Earth. Hi all, and thank you for joining me for another episode of For What It's Earth by me, Marissa Jacobs at the Art of Ecology, and Samantha Rebuck, semi-permanent guest. Woo! Yay! Here, nature enthusiasts, animal lovers, and eco-warriors are going to discover and explore so many new facets of the environment that we all love and creative ways to make a positive difference for the planet. Last week on this little climate change mini-series, we went into depth about climate and its impact on ocean health, as well as really, we focused on a lot of land stuff and watershed health, as well as how watersheds impact ocean health. So that was a very great episode for people who are like, I live on land. This doesn't apply to me. It totally does. Go back and listen to it. This week, though, we are going to we're continuing. We started with just general overview. Then we did sky, and we did oceans. Now we're going to go to the land terrestrial ecosystems, as well as climate change's impact on flora and fauna found on those terrestrial ecosystems. So think our food chain and all of how that is impacted. So I need to ask you this, Sam. What is your favorite animal?
Sea turtles.
Sea turtles. Okay, so last week's we with the ocean, but that's okay because what happens on land, as we discussed, impacts the ocean.
I have a terrestrial one if you would prefer.
Okay, yes, lay it on me.
Zebras.
Really? I didn't know that.
I love zebras.
Oh, cool.
Ever since I was a kid.
I mean,
I love horses too, so.
Well, horses, and then you have the super cool, funky, striped mini horses of the African plains. So,
right.
There you go. Very fun. Awesome. Mine is, I'm torn. I also have a marine one that I really like. I should have mentioned it last time. It is the blue-ringed octopus or the whale shark. I also really love mandarin gobies. I have a hard time. I have problems. But terrestrial-wise, it is the giraffe and the quokka of Australia. But we're going to talk about how those are all impacted by climate change in a sad way. But some of the cool things about it as well. So we mentioned how we impact ocean health. But I kind of wanted to go over how humans then impact on land, how we impact the wildlife that we share our ecosystems with. So do you ever see, I know you live in a more kind of suburban to urban setting than I do.
Mm-hmm.
How much do you see in terms of wildlife?
So it depends. Like at my house directly is minimal. But we are only about 5 minutes from farmland and about 10 or 15 minutes close to our local hiking mountain. So I can see a decent amount of wildlife. But I also, if you go 5-10 minutes the other way, we're very urban. So we're in like that kind of in between stage where we can see kind of normal, I'd say like just normal woodland wildlife. Usually what we see. Okay. So I'm guessing like birds, squirrels. I would think in your sort of, it's called an ecotone where it kind of butts up, two habitats butt up next to each other. You probably get a little bit of cool biodiversity there just being on that edge. Like you could then see the wildlife that's very, very like shy and I live in woodlands, as well as the things that are like, I'm a trash panda, hi. Right. Yeah, we definitely, there's a lot of foxes in our area. I don't get to see them too often, but we saw a possum.
Did you?
A few days ago, just walking across the road at night. Lots of deer, lots and lots of deer. Yeah, lots of deer. Yeah. We saw a raccoon family a few years ago crossing the road.
They're so precious.
Yeah. But like at our house directly, it's squirrels and birds and the outdoor cats.
Oh gosh. Ugh.
I have one that attacked my wreath because I had a bird's nest in it.
Yeah. All right, everybody, this is going to be a separate tangent, not climate change, but that leads me to keep your cats inside, people. There's just so many reasons to.
Spay and neuter them.
Spay and neuter them, right? Keep your cat, they're not going to spray on your furniture anymore. There's so many reasons, not just like you can enrich your cat inside. Kitty cats are domestic. They want to be cushy and loved and pampered, right?
Yeah.
So cushy, love, and pamper them. There's a lot of diseases that they could get outside. Drinking water, you got leptospirosis. We don't want our little kitty cats to be suffering, right? Please don't put them outside.
Yep.
Also, environmentally, not just, cats are going to get hit by cars, things like that, but they're the number one killer of birds. And I know you don't believe me that your precious little pumpkin, not you, Sam. I know you keep your cats inside, but your precious little pumpkin is out there killing birds. That's what they do.
Yep.
They might not bring it to you. They might bring you the little mouse instead. And you're like, great, they're reducing pest populations. They're out there having a grand old time, swatting birds out the sky and pulling things out of wreaths.
Yep.
They are
in a bubble backpack for your cat. That's what I did.
Yeah, bubble backpack, leash.
Yeah, in her bubble backpack.
Right. Patios where you make like a little cat patio. They're becoming more popular, which I'm really thankful for because your cat just loves the window. Your cat's not going to be suffering, right? This is your little precious pumpkin. You want to protect them as well as protecting the other, like they are the number one cause of bird deaths. Aside from window strikes in the United States, as well as a huge contributor to small mammal extinctions here in the United States. So please keep your cats inside because those birds provide us with food. They disperse seeds. Yeah. So that's my tangent. Thank you.
Sorry.
That's my one quota. I am done with tangents now. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So what animals do you see at home?
What animals do I see? Deer. Again, white-tailed deer population is rampant. Now that I've moved, it's nowhere near as bad as when I was in Bucks County. I see a lot more of the understory here than I did in Bucks County. I have only ever seen one live possum. Otherwise, I see a lot of roadkill possum.
Yep.
Again, fox, lots of birds, raccoons. I've seen a skunk before. Trying to
Hopefully
think
not too
what
close to the skunk.
Actually, the skunk that I saw was very close, but he was chilling. He was having a great time walking around. It was when I was at undergrad at Del Val. I was an RA, so we had to walk around at like 2 a.m. to make sure that nobody was causing an undue ruckus. And while we were walking between the different dorm buildings, there was a skunk kind of just wandering around, sniffing. And we did not realize, we thought it was like a deer at first because it was way bigger than we originally thought a skunk would be. Like this big with its tail. His tail was up, but it wasn't threatened by our being there. And we kind of just walked along with it and we're like, all right, skunk, thank you for not spraying us. We're going to go into this building now. But
that's a fun experience.
Yeah, it was fun. It was really cool I had not seen a skunk in person before. And I was amazed by its size. I was thinking skunks were more like cat size.
Yeah.
And this skunk was more like dog sized.
Wow.
Like, oh, all right. Definitely a successful old skunk.
Yeah. So this leads me to think, all right, you grew up in the middle of the woods.
Yes.
Like literally your house was surrounded.
Oh yeah. Bears all the
woods.
time. Lots of bears.
But yet the first time you saw a skunk was in college.
in an urban
area.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, skunks like to eat, trash and stuff. So that makes sense. So do you think that urban sprawl and just urbanization in general is bringing more of these animals into this space, again, where we grew up in the mountains, and that's your first experience with a live skunk?
Yeah, I definitely, oh my gosh. So there is a lot about how I had mentioned the ecotones and what those are. There's a lot of animals that really don't mind humans, and they are the opportunistic animals that are going to be eating the trash and the berries. They like both. So there's definitely a lot of animals that you can see, which then causes the human wildlife conflicts of people don't like it when coyotes are going through their garbage cans, because what if they eat their dogs too, sort of thing. But definitely growing up in the Poconos, there was just so much space that even though there was a reported higher population of these wildlife species, they just had space to roam around, and I didn't necessarily see them as often. I did see bears a lot, which now I don't at all. But these animals that are the opportunistic ones that don't mind human, as we're kind of taking their space, which leads to the habitat degradation that climate change is causing, and then humans gathering because we need to rely on similar resources. We're kind of pushing these animals all into one area. And even though they don't necessarily mind, they're like, hey, garbage cans everywhere now. That's awesome. Right. There's still implications of them disease spread and lower habitat quality, things like that. But we're seeing more of these like urban animals, like red fox population. You see a lot more in urban areas or these suburban areas that you have the urban and the rural butting up. The skunks, things like that. Squirrels. Oh my gosh. Squirrels would be in the trash cans everywhere rooting for pizza. And I'm like, squirrel dude, you don't eat that. No. Go eat your nuts, right? Go spread the oak seeds around. Don't. And he'd be like, nah, I want this pizza that someone threw out. And so you just see squirrels sitting on trash cans. So you definitely see a lot of those. And you have, because there's a smaller space, a higher chance to see those animals as well, which is kind of fun, as long as we don't have the birds running into buildings and the roadkill incidents and like that.
Yeah.
Yep. So we definitely humans are causing some issues in regards to like habitat fragmentation. Putting roadways right through woodland environments, or building up, and urban sprawl just keeps growing and growing and growing. And so that definitely impacts the amount of space that wildlife have. Right. Which, again, can kind of lead to the human wildlife conflict. So have you ever had issues with animals like coming up, going through trash or anything like that where you are?
I've never noticed it really. Maybe in our apartment when we first moved to Maryland, when we used to have to go to the dumpsters because they weren't as well maintained in our community. Now they pick up trash twice a week. So
okay. I was like, oh my gosh.
Twice a week they pick up trash. So I've never really noticed that aspect of it. So the cats I've seen go into the drainage areas, and somebody had reported a fox recently too. Okay. Going down into the drainage area. So that's probably the most kind of human animal interaction that we really see directly here.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I haven't had granted, I'm probably the best person for this to happen to, because I was almost a little excited, but in the old apartment,
Oh my goodness, that place was a wildlife sanctuary within its walls. And we had squirrels in the ceilings, chewing holes in the ceiling. So there was one point where I was sitting at my desk and Hef, my dog, was with me. And all of a sudden, a little squirrel face pops through the ceiling. We both look up and we're both freaking out. And we're like, what? This little squirrel like drops down. He falls through the hole he made. It's like running around and then goes out. And I was like, oh my gosh. And then we got the squirrels out, I think. But the concern was, I didn't care that they were here, but the concern was that if they're chewing on wires, that could cause like the building to burn down, sort of thing, which that's a huge concern. I don't care that they're in the ceilings eating nuts. Like that part doesn't bother me. But then you have that human wildlife conflict if we're trying to live in the same place and they could be burning down my house, sort of thing. And then the most recent one was a flying squirrel got in. Whoa. Somehow. We dubbed it Lady Sputnik. She was a lovely little creature, but I don't know how she got in. I don't know why. I mean, part of me knows why, because flying squirrels rely on eastern red cedar populations, and they'll like shred the bark and then make their nests out of it, which those nests, because it's cedar, prevent mite and parasites from coming. If we think of like a cedar chest deters moths, things like that. The wildlife knows that too. So the flying squirrels will use that as their bedding. And that's like their tree. That's what they rely on. And as we keep urbanizing and cutting down these trees to build homes or build roadways, we're removing that really required habitat. So she really didn't have anywhere to go, but somehow she got in and then got into the apartment. So she's running all over the floor, absolutely scared out of her mind. She's not supposed to be awake during the day. They're strict nocturnal creatures. So right there, she's super stressed out, using energy that she should not be using.
Right.
Because she's awake during the day as well. And then we were finding little poops all over, which that was the concern, was that's a source of potential disease spread.
Right.
I don't care that there's a flying squirrel around. She was so adorable. Oh my goodness. Her little wing flap, and her little child, she would sit there and like look around really scared. And it was so cute. But again,
you have that about your dog.
I'm worried about my dog. I'm worried about the fact that she made a home or a nocturnal bed in my fruit bowl underneath the fruit.
Oh, wow.
Which was so cute. But where we had the fruit bowl was close to our apartment. Was structured very weird. One of the reasons why we had to move. But there was like a hole in a cabinet that was over top of the fruit bowl. So it was a really great place for her to like hide nestled in this thing. And then when we would go to get fruit, she'd right up the little hole. But now she has direct access to the food that we're putting in our bodies. And bananas we can peel, stuff like that. But potential disease spread for us, potential disease spread for the dog. So it's definitely this concern of like, you should not be here, and this is not good for us, as much as I think you're adorable. Right. And there's now this increased human wildlife conflict in that way, because of this urbanization of, there are a lot of animals that rely very specifically on certain aspects of habitat, and we're getting rid of them.
Right.
So that's why I wanted to know if in your area, being more urbanized than mine, if you had any issues like that.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we did have, we had 2 birds' nests in our summer wreath this year.
Okay.
Which not that it caused a lot of issues for us because we don't use our front door often. We use the garage. But every time I'd go to use the door, I would like push on it a little bit, be like, okay, mommy bird, do not fly in my house.
Oh, yeah, because if you're opening your door, it can get in.
Right. And the fact that we have a tree right in front of our house where they could have chose to put its nest.
Right.
However, it's more likely to have a squirrel or other birds probably go to it. So it was like, oh, this wreath is much nicer and will nestle my little nest perfectly.
Right. The chances of a hawk finding you in a wreath are way less likely. But now that impacts how you get into your home. And there's, I
and the mess on our front door.
On it, And I feel kind of badly because you and I both are animal people. We like animals.
Right.
But even still, there is that sense of, as much as I like you, you should not be here.
Right.
And how do we handle that? And I think that there's a lot of issues then with people who are not as wildlife crazy or animal crazy, who are just like chucking nests out. They're like, I don't want this here. But it might not be at the right time of year to chuck a nest out to keep the bird, or they might truly just chuck it and not put it.
Exactly.
And,
so it stayed there. I obviously let it there. I let the eggs hatch and the little birds fly away. Then I cleaned up the nest. And got another one.
Oh.
So then that nest.
It really liked your wreath.
It did.
Wow.
Yeah. But a lot of people probably would have been like, I don't want these birds pooping all over my front door. I'm gonna get rid of it.
Yeah. Which, I mean, I kind of don't blame you. And this is where I kind of draw a line for myself of, I am also a part of this ecosystem. And I think a lot of conservationists or scientists kind of forget to highlight that aspect of, we live here too. We are sharing these ecosystems. We're not separate from it, or we're not completely in charge. Like, we are truly sharing. We need to think of how we live here as well, but how we can live in harmony.
That's a great point.
So I think there's like a disconnect there. And I'm like, okay, this is my home. You can have your own homes, but this is my home. This is where my family lives. And while I want the surrounding area that I am managing to be conducive for wildlife species, you cannot come inside.
Yep. That's a great way to think of it.
Yeah, but I get that sometimes that's really hard because we do want to protect wildlife, and what might that look like, and how do we share the land that we live on can be a challenge. I know that, as we keep moving and keep developing the land here, the wildlife need somewhere to go. And so how do we, as land managers, how do we treat the wildlife, and not just the animals, but the plants as well, because the plants are providing the homes and the habitat for these animals, or they're providing food for animals. So how do we manage both the plant aspect and the wildlife aspect as human population increases? And then you have climate change on top of that, coming in and saying, okay, well, desertification is going to happen. And as we are using the land and increasing, and we're clear cutting forests in order to build up more, how is that impacting grasslands? Like, prairies and grasslands in the United States are like one of the most endangered habitats, just due to climate change and urbanization. But like, how do we manage that? Because our population lives here too.
Just that's a very, very big question.
Yeah. Which, not that you and I are gonna answer that, but just one of the things that like kind of eats at the back of my mind is like, that's a big thing to manage.
Yeah, it is. And you only have so much space. It's not like we can create more land to be like, oh, well, as we move out of the cities and into the farmland, it's okay. The farms can just move.
There's finite space. And I do really appreciate like wildlife gardening and things like that. Doug Tallamy, who is very big into naturalizing garden space and human wildlife and getting outside, creating these natural spaces in urban or home settings. He does a lot. And one of the things that he said was that if everybody, we have our homes, right? But whatever you have, your window boxes, if you're on an urban area, or patios, or if you're more in a suburban or rural area and you do gardens, if everybody was able to do some tiny little piece of gardening for wildlife and reincorporating native plants in your area, we would be able to create a habitat that is like larger than Yellowstone, just That's with awesome. Our wildlife gardens, and how easy that can be. And so, no, we're not necessarily creating more space, but we're saying the space that we're taking up, we can still maintain as habitat that these animals can utilize, because there's so many different stressors on wildlife, both that are human caused and climate caused. So like if we're causing some problems, we should also be able to fix some of these.
Exactly. I know one of the things in a lot of rural city, especially more eco-focused cities, like a lot in California, even parts of DC, and I think New York City, is to build the gardens on top of the building, the rooftop gardens. That's becoming a really big thing the past, I'd say probably 10 or 15 years. That's really become roofs. Yeah.
They're so cool too.
They are so cool. And I've seen too, another big thing in like probably more like our area. We don't have a yard that we maintain whatsoever. We're in a townhouse. Is to do like vertical gardens on like pallets and stuff. That's another really big one.
That's super cool. And that's the creative thinking that I'm like, that's how we should be thinking, because just because you don't have a huge garden space or farmland doesn't mean you can't do things.
Exactly.
And I do know we talked a little bit about HOAs in regards to like the solar panel installation. And I know when I was in an HOA, I was not allowed to put up bird feeders because surprisingly, bird feeders attracted birds.
Right.
Who would have guessed?
Yeah. And HOAs think birds are pests.
Yeah. And then they poop on your really nice BMWs and all your Bucks County is a fancy pants place. But then people would get upset about that. And if you get something nice, you do want to keep it nice. I understand that. But there was a lot of things, really simple things. Like they got upset about my perennials. I'm like, well, we have this very urbanized setting where we developed a lot of the land. Where are the animals going to go? And now they're competing with each other. And everybody, we need to remember that those animals impact our health directly. So we can't just get rid of them.
Right.
If they are an inconvenience, they need somewhere to go. And we need them to stay healthy, because if we don't have them around, our food sources are going to dwindle. Our habitats themselves, like desertification is, you can look at grazing of herbivores and how the animals' movement, like the foxes in Yellowstone, impact the flow of the river, things like that. Like these wildlife species directly impact these habitats, and then we don't have our green spaces, or we don't have healthy, fertile soil for our agricultural endeavors. And we wonder why.
Right.
So
exactly. Yep. And going into pollinators too, people don't even realize the importance of pollinators and what they do for us. because especially thinking of you talk about the grasslands, so the kind of center of the country where we grow most of our corn and our wheat and all those other, grains that we need. And we need those to have food. That is where it all starts. And it's not just we need to be able to take care of our grasslands so we can have cows, so we can have beef. It's also all of the plants that we are eating. And it also leads into the ocean. And if you want to eat seafood. So that's a big part of it too.
Absolutely. And it's really incredible then going and talking about that specific aspect is we are currently in the middle of the 6th mass extinction event. And I know we talked a little bit about geological eras and how to us, it's just like so mind-blowing that humans have caused a new geological era when these things are thousands and tens of thousands of years long.
Right.
And our direct impact on the land has caused this. So the 6th mass extinction is kind of separate from the past 5, and that the past 5 were all natural phenomena. You have asteroids, you have, come in and kill into the dinosaurs, things like that, ice ages. And now this one is specifically human caused, primarily from unsustainable land development. And we think of unsustainable land development as being very separate from human caused climate change, but they're there's a direct correlation between them because the weather is becoming more severe and we have to move from the coastlands inland. Or we are saying that, desertification is increasing as the temperature increases, plants are not able to survive as well. And therefore, our land is becoming unfertile. So now agriculturalists need to move and find new areas. And so everything is just expanding, but we're not doing it in a way that is sustainable. We're not doing it in a way that is thinking on a big picture. We're thinking of the now.
Right.
But hopefully humans are going to be around for a while. We need to be thinking of these other things. Like you're saying with the pollinators, if we're not thinking of the pollinators years from now, we're not going to have food.
Right.
It won't matter if we have moved our agricultural systems to another area if there's nothing to pollinate the crops.
Exactly.
And it's just, right now I'm looking at a chart of the 6th mass extinction and the number of species that are disappearing. And we have around 300 mollusks we've gotten rid of and are extinct. So those are like your shellfish, right? We've got birds as the second highest number of animals that are being extinct. Again, going back to these cats, like we need to be protecting our birds. They're really, really threatened. Back in 2019, National Audubon Society did a study called Survival by Degrees, which was how human-caused climate change is causing these huge bird extinctions. And it took a look at over 600 bird species and kind of categorized them into threatened, climate threatened, endangered, sustainable, all those different levels. And you could then look at the data, input your own zip code, and find the birds in your area that were climate threatened or that were moving in, which is where I got my data about the goldfinch that we talked about before and how the painted bunting's going to be moving up. But birds are in a really bad way because of this, because the insect emergence in the spring and their migration time and the flowers blooming, all of those things were connected. They needed the insects to be able to feed their babies high protein levels. They needed the flowers for those insects to utilize. They needed that habitat. And now because of temperature changes, the insect emergence, they're coming out early and then being killed off by the frosts, things like that. And then the flowers are blooming at a weird time too, because suddenly it's warm in February and January, and the daffodils are like, hey, I'm going to exist. And then the birds aren't coming until like April, and they're like, where's my food?
Where's our stuff? Right.
And they're dying off at these dramatic rates. So they're already really stressed. We don't need our kitty cats to be stressing them out even more. But just looking at this extinction graph is just
yeah, I bet
we need to be conscientious land managers.
That makes me think of monarch butterflies, because they run into the same issue, especially because they only eat milkweed. They don't have other food sources. I mean, yes, there's different species of milkweed, but it's like you're saying, it starts to come up earlier before they're leaving Mexico. And so they're coming up, and they were the migrators. So they were born in September. They flew to Mexico. They stayed there all winter. Now they're ready to start migrating up a little bit. And they're like, all right, let's go to Texas. We're ready to start the next generation of butterflies. And we get there and there's no milkweed. So where do I put my eggs that are now ready to hatch?
Yeah.
And that's a big one.
I personally have not done the research and have the quantitative data on this, but just, in the first episode, we were just talking about what we have seen in our lifetimes of seeing these patterns. I think this year I saw a total of 2 monarch butterflies. I mean, I do personally count, but I don't know what the variables are. Was I just not in the right place at the right time to see them, sort of thing? But just the number of monarchs that I have seen has gone down dramatically. And it's not that I'm not outside. Like I teach outside. And I have my own wildlife garden sort of thing. And one of the monarchs was at my garden, and I was like freaking out taking pictures because I was like, yes, I have a monarch. Whoa! And then the other one was at the nature center. But I did not see any chrysalis this year for monarchs. I think I saw a total of 3 monarch caterpillars.
Wow.
And I am part of a community garden that's an all organic garden that has milkweed planted like around it. And right across from that garden is a native meadow that has a ton of milkweed there. Like, I'm in areas that should have monarch species, and I am not seeing them. And it's sad because, I love how bright and colorful they are. But again, going back to the pollinators, like the adults are pollinators. They're going to our nectar plants and really making big impacts. And now we're not having them.
Right. There's a lot of things affecting monarchs, and that we don't need to get super into them because I easily could.
Well, there we go.
It's really interesting because this year I think I've seen the most monarchs that I've
really? Okay.
Probably the past 10 years. I've seen so many monarchs this year. It is impressive. And I see them in random places, not in fields. So I don't know. Was it a freak thing this year? Did I just happen to see a lot of them?
You had all the Pennsylvania ones.
For previous years, I could go a whole summer and see none. So this is just so interesting for us to be on opposite ends of the extreme. And it leads, it's not causation is definitely not correlation. So it's definitely not human caused climate change. I don't think in that sense, but it's interesting that just we're talking about the different extremes, especially in weather. Like you said, we're having 80-degree days in February, and then 2 weeks later, it's like 20 degrees.
Yeah.
Right. So these extremes, you're seeing them probably in all different aspects, not just weather, not just temperature of the ocean, but even just extremes of, I live in a more suburban urban area, and I saw more monarch butterflies than you
Right.
who literally probably on a daily basis is in their native habitat.
Yeah.
It's just crazy.
Yeah. And I definitely think that also goes back to the timing issues of they're trying to search for their food. And one thing that I definitely noticed was, at least in southeastern Pennsylvania, butterfly time is kind of like July and August. But the milkweed was already done.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It had already gone to seed. And it was just like, oh boy. And then you have invasive species impacting things and stressing ecosystems out even more. And just there's an increase in invasive species just due to, not anybody's ill intention, but a globalization of, you have so many people moving around all over the world, which is such a cool thing that if I wanted, I could board a plane and go back to Kenya today.
Exactly.
I could do that.
Yeah, the connection is incredible.
Right. It's so cool. We can experience these cultures and get to know our global neighbors and understand their ecosystems and our impact on. So I love it. But then you have the spotted lanternfly, the emerald ash borer, and brown horminated stink bug, and those are just the insects, let alone the other plants and diseases like white nose syndrome and bats, things like that. Like, you've got all of these invasive issues that put another added level of stress on our ecosystems beyond urbanization, beyond climate change. And I don't know about you, but when I have one stress too many on my life, that's when I have a mental breakdown.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So definitely being conscientious land managers is very important.
Yes, definitely.
For all of that. What else can you think of in terms of like the climate change aspect? So we talked a lot about the urbanization, but with climate change in particular, thinking of the Great Plains and the desertification of the Midwest, but I'm just trying to think of like specific climate things that impact wildlife.
I mean, I think we touched on it a little bit. The change in temperatures definitely is affecting migrations in all different types of animals. And then that throws off their kind of internal clock of their migration. Now I know a little bit about the monarch migration. Originally, we thought it was like that internal clock of, oh, it's time to go now. But scientists are finding out that they actually use the position of the sun above the horizon as like a compass to be like, oh, now it's time to go. So that's interesting. I don't know if other animals have something similar to that, because then they wouldn't be affected by climate change because they're just following the sun, which is not affected by climate change.
Right.
But most migrations, I think, are weather dependent and temperature dependent.
Right.
More than that specific timing.
I know for birds, migration is, we often think of like, well, we have the spring and the fall migration, right? And at least when I'm teaching the kids about birds, they always think migration is temperature, which temperature plays a part, but it truly is food source driven, which where you getting your food source from? Well, seasonal changes impact food availability. And I know with then climate change, we are not seeing a lot of the raptors anymore because they don't need to come this far south because the lakes aren't freezing farther north. So birds aren't needing to leave Canada to find thawed out rivers.
Right.
And so a lot of them are staying farther up north, which then, because you don't have your predators, you get this weird population flux.
Yep.
But it's really, if we can find food, there's no reason to leave.
Exactly.
But
right. And it's interesting because the population flux, like climate change and global warming, is a natural phenomenon.
Right.
It does go up and down between predator and prey. But if it's happening at a rate where it shouldn't be happening, then that throws the whole ecosystem off.
Right. Because again, now you have this huge increase and we get excited because we see populations increasing. And we're like, oh, yay, that's fantastic. But then you have roadkill events like the white-tailed deer populations that are in a boom. And we're just, which is then a threat to our own lives of like, we hit them with our cars.
Right.
And what, that's not fun. But also then just with the fact that in Bucks County, there's no understory population of plants because the deer are eating themselves out of house and home, and how that plays a part. And then without those plants, birds don't have their nesting habitat, or decomposers are like, well, we don't have our understory leaf litter that we need, or things like that. It's all this fascinating connection. And then I know we talked a little bit about the goldfinches as well, but if things are staying farther up north, that's an increase in competition on northern resources, and there's not any farther that they can go. We have this finite space. So it's definitely a big deal. But I don't necessarily want us to be harping on how awful humans are for developing land, or as much as I want to be inspiring people to think about things creatively. So I know you mentioned the vertical gardening. Are there any other creative things that you have seen people doing in urban settings, like the green roofs, or stuff that we could maybe inspire some people to look into?
I think just the creative ways of gardening, like the vertical gardens or the like stacked gardens. That's another one that I've seen. You kind of put the pots like on a pole, and it's like,
oh, okay, gotcha.
Just something that anything that takes your plants, I think, upwards, especially I'm thinking just personally of my space. I live in a townhouse, so I have, I'm lucky to be one of the houses that has a tree in front of my house. And I have this little garden patch that I can garden in.
Oh, that's really fun.
And and I have a little patio space that I can have pots for plants. But it's still only a finite space.
Right.
So I think trying to garden any way upward is probably one of the best ways we can. Because I can't call my HOA and say, hey, I don't want my back area mowed this summer because I want to let it grow for the wildlife. That ain't gonna work.
That's if you have the ability to transition from lawn to native meadow, go for it. But I do understand that is not always feasible.
One thing we're lucky to have is right behind our house is a natural space owned by the county, and it's just it's just like a nature preserve area. It's not huge, but it's big enough that they come in and they trim when they need to, especially to keep from, like, if it would catch on fire, that would be bad. But it's pretty just native on its own.
That's awesome.
That's really cool.
Yeah, that is really
spaces
cool.
like that, if you're an advocate to try to work with your county or your neighborhood, however, in Maryland, everything is county focused, county.
Right.
Pennsylvania is not. So if you're to be an advocate to make sure we have more green spaces, the urban sprawl in my specific town is insane. to the point that our elementary school is at almost 300% over capacity because there are more families and houses than we have schools. There is a school under development, so we're getting there.
Then even that, now you have to build these whole new, and schools are not small, they're big.
Yeah, big schools. So as we see the development in our area, we're like, oh no, we're losing these natural spaces. But we've seen, we like to drive through the neighborhoods, and they do try to incorporate a decent amount of green space.
That's so cool.
And I think that's incredible. So like they're trying to build like these little neighborhoods within the bigger neighborhoods. And so there's a huge grassy space with like townhouses on both sides where you have that space in between. And they do have gardening space. And then on top, one thing that kind of comes nice with development, you have to make runoff areas, obviously, and retention ponds.
Right.
Well, with retention ponds, you're going to have, you would need to make it bigger than the normal water that's in there, obviously for big rain events. So you are going to get like natural plants and just kind of natural growth of those areas that are protected because they can't obviously build inside of a retention pond. So that's a nice thing that just kind of naturally comes with development.
Yeah.
That you're going to have that natural space.
Yeah, I think that also goes to, I know here in Pennsylvania, townships and municipalities have something called an Environmental Advisory Council, or EAC. And they put a lot of regulations on building. So if you are building a certain amount and you have to clear things, what do you by law, what are you required to plant? And there are a lot of environmental advisory councils who are like, hey, you took down stuff to build. You need to put in this percentage of native plant populations in your water retention basins. They need to be native watershed and wetland plants. And so that is really cool. I would like to see more of it and more builders who are already thinking on that level and not
being forced to do it.
Right? Yeah. Which I know that there are green landscape architecture out there, green builders, and I'd love to see it. I would just love to see more of it. And I know there's a lot of places like in Germany and in Europe where green infrastructure is just the norm. And I'd love to see that here in America.
I want to see one of those natural green bridges that they build.
The wildlife corridors.
I want to see one.
I know we do have some in America on the East Coast too. I've never personally driven under one, but I've seen pictures of them and read articles. They're super cool.
Yeah.
But like, that's the sort of thing where we're like, that's an easy enough thing to construct. We have the technology now to be thinking in new creative ways. Which I think is one thing that I know I talk to my mom a lot of, like, climate change is this kind of hopeless subject, an anxiety inducing subject. But I am so encouraged by the rate of technology growing. And the fact that I see a lot of Gen Z is the generation below millennials. And I see such a huge uptick of environmental conscientiousness in younger people. And I'm like, wow,
I agree.
With the rate of the next generation having a passion for their planet because they see the dire situation and they're like, we need to do something. And they see that.
Right.
And with the rate of technological expansion, I am so excited to see what they built and what they create.
Yeah.
Because I bet it's beyond my imagination. And how are they going to make the planet better because they're combining those passions?
Right. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So I'm excited, and I definitely have hope because I know technology is expanding. What are they going to build that makes like those wildlife bridges that like we wouldn't have thought of?
many, many years ago. And we're like, hey, this is the way that we can avoid roadkill incidents, that we can avoid this fragmentation issue that animals can get from one side of habitat to another without risk of.
Right.
And it's just it's creative and it's cool that people thought of that. So
yeah, I agree.
I definitely have hope for the future because of stuff like that. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, for what it's Earth, each person who can be thinking creatively about their land management, about land use, ways to incorporate native plants in maybe a vertical space, pallets, lattices, window boxes, things like that. And just be conscientious about how you are using the land that we share with the wildlife around us. You're going to be making the planet a much greener and ultimately healthier place. So with that, thank you so much for digging deeper into the natural world with the Art of Ecology and with Sam Rebuck. If you enjoyed this week's episode, you can support. I do want to make a little plug. I should have done this last episode, but that's okay. I have a Patreon that I'll do little coloring pages, art and ecology education. However, this podcast is also a part, and you can actually go become a patron on my Patreon, and you will get exclusive podcast content and little extra information the way I break these podcasts up and record them. You can get some extra environmental content, so I'm going to plug that. So if you also wanted to go deeper with what we're talking about, you can do that over on my Patreon. So patreon.com/The Art of Ecology. Sam, do you have anything to plug?
Thinking about monarch butterflies and migration. You might, if you happen to see monarchs and you see a little white spot on their hind wing, take a deeper look if you can, because it could be a tracking sticker. Or if you can get a point, if you can involve yourself, I know Cape May is a big part of this, to do tagging, which is super cool, is putting tagging stickers onto monarchs. And if you see any, if you can get that number, you can actually take it to Monarch Watch and be able to see and track where that butterfly has been seen and where it might go. There are populations in Mexico then over the winter that go to look for all of the stickers. And then that's how they use it partially for counting to see how the generations are growing.
That's
and how
so
the
cool.
population.
I knew the nature center I worked at did a tracking program one year, but I didn't know they would like go to Mexico and actually calculate that data. I just thought it was like a fun way to track, like kind of GPS track.
Yeah. No,
cool.
I actually, my internship group, every few years, they take a trip to Mexico to get to be a part of it. It's really cool.
That is so cool. Wow. Again, we come up with some really creative things as humans.
Yeah, it's super cool.
Adapt to all this. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much. And you can find me as well on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at The Art of Ecology. And with that, we shall see you next episode on For What It's Earth. Bye.